to get started. We'll keep the bar open, so feel free to stay in line, and we'll just kick it off. I'm Charlotte Duran. I'm a producer on KPCC's in-person team. For those of you who are unfamiliar with KPCC, we're a multi-platform organization. We're on air at 89.3. We're online at kpcc.org, and we're also in person. We do lots of events, and we have lots of election events coming up, so we hope that you can make it out to those, as well as tonight's props and pints. Coming up next week, we have a supervisors debate at the Crawford Family Forum, and we also have a cram session coming up with Air Talk's Larry Mantle on November 2nd. We're really trying to create a voter game plan, so we want to help you this election season with all that you have to think about. And we also are here tonight. We have our big mic available if you want to ask any election-related questions or if you have any comments. We're right in the back. Stop by at the end of the night, and you can record with Big Mike. And I'd like to now introduce Aaron Mendelson. He can also tell you ways that you can connect with KPCC's newsroom.
Hey guys, my name's Aaron Mendelson. I'm a data reporter at KPCC, and I'm here to talk to you tonight about political mailers and a project we've got going called Who Mailed It? Who Mailed It? So it's an effort to track political mailers in California. These things, you're probably familiar with them if you're a registered voter. And these humble little pieces of political mailer are actually an important part of our election process. They can swing a city council election, maybe even a statewide proposition election. But they're not very well tracked. So that's where you guys, our audience, come in. We're asking people to send us the mailers that they're getting. You can do that over email at whomailedit@scpr.org. You can tweet at us if you're on Twitter using the hashtag whomailedit. And if you didn't catch all of that, I will be here after the event. We can talk about it and figure out how you can get involved. So enjoy the event tonight.
And before we get started, just a few housekeeping tips. Please no video recording tonight or Facebook living. We are live streaming the event, so we ask that you keep your flash off. We do encourage you to take photos and share them on social media. You can connect with us tonight on Twitter at KPCC in person. That'll be hashtag props and pints and also hashtag voter game plan. Now, all right, I'd like to introduce tonight's host, Patt Morrison.
And come on up to my guests, Sherry Bebitch Jeffe, who tweets at SBJUSC, the Saul Price School of Public Policy at USC, and Bob Stern, the past president of the Center for Governmental Studies. Thank you both.
Oh, our pleasure. Hi, guys.
Now, this is not going to be your Cliff Notes version.
Yeah,
this
it
is not going to be your Reader's Digest version. This is going to be the full-fat, full-carb, 100 proof going through your ballots tonight. So is everybody ready? All right.
No.
Because look at this sucker up here. And you've got them in your laps. We're going to be doing them in the order they appear. Even though there are a couple of ballot measures that are related to other ballot measures, we wanted to make sure that you can just sit there and go through the ballot without having to flip back and forth too much, so you can follow along, as they say, the bouncing dot, as you do at home. So, a point I want to make about these folks up here, they are the best at analyzing this. They do not take positions on them. They are analysts.
Somebody else up here?
And like a good debate team, they can argue either side, so you may hear something from either one of them. Thanks at the beginning of this for Angel City Brewery. So, there we go. So who can argue with Angel City Brewery? The best. Thank you so much. So, all right. So if you will open your books to Proposition 51, and I just pray that I don't end up dropping all of this stuff.
Tell me about
So
it.
this is, that I'm dropping on purpose, this is about money to fix and build classrooms. We get so many of these at the local level, including Measure B some years ago here in Los Angeles. So exactly what it's going to do and how it's going to do it, we will hear first from Bob, who is going to explain what's going on the yes side here.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you very much for everybody coming. But I think you all should be aware that this could be an action movie, the ballot pamphlet. It has sex in it. It has drugs in it. It has death in it. It has money in it. And so it has everything you want. Should be a very exciting ballot. And one other thing, we had 28 on the ballot in 1990. So, and plus, if you lived in San Diego, you'd have another 17. If you lived in San Francisco, you'd have another 25. So
So
chill
no
out.
whining.
That's right. I mean, this is a piece of cake compared to 1990 with 28, plus there were another 17, by the way, in the June primary, for a total of 45 state measures in 1990. So, with that.
Well,
let's
it is
get-
the Reader's Digest, the version then. I
Yeah,
stand
right,
corrected.
Yes,
sure.
it is.
All
This
right,
is a
so-
short evening, Prop 51.
Oh, we'll all be drunk
So,
before this is
Prop
over.
51.
This is a $9 billion bond measure for education. Now, the interesting thing about this is it's an initiative. All the past school bond measures were put on the ballot by the legislature, and this is the first one dealing with education. That's an initiative. And the reason it's put on there is because interest rates are very low, plus the building industry and the school boards all want to have more money for construction of schools. The fascinating part about this is it's supported by the Democratic Party, but not supported by Jerry Brown, who controls the Democratic Party.
Are you kidding?
And
Well, nominally
nominally.
controls the Democratic Party.
And so again, what this does is will cost, if this passes, $9 billion, means basically an increase in the state budget by $500 million a year, because it's a 30-year bond measure, and we pay basically $500 million a year.
As the interest on that borrowing.
That's, well, I wanted to pay back the bond as well. Now, another reason that this is a statewide measure, all statewide measures, including bond measures, take a majority vote to pass. So it's a majority of those voting on the measure.
So it's not a tax as defined by Prop 13, it's a bond measure.
Well,
and that's different.
even a
not.
tax at the state level would take a majority vote. If it were a local bond measure, and there's LA Community College has a local bond measure, Santa Monica has a local bond measure, that takes a 55% vote to approve. Statewide, 50%. So the construction industry and the school boards like this because it's 50%. The last bond measure, by the way, that dealing with the schools was put on the ballot in 2006 and was put on by the legislature.
Okay, Sherry?
Well, I guess I was supposed to be doing the opponent's arguments, and I will, but just a couple of things. Bob mentioned that the last statewide bond issue was in 2006, but I'll bet there's some people out there saying, now, I know I voted for bonds just recently. It has been the localities who, by and large, have placed these kinds of bonds on the ballot. So if you're thinking there's been too much state involvement in bonds, not really. It's been more on the local level. Also, with regard to the large number of initiatives on the ballot, you should know that at the beginning, at the early days of the initiative process, we had a similar rule. You just had initiatives on the general election ballot. Then about 1960, we just rolled the dice, and we were allowed to have propositions on the primary ballot, the general election ballot, special election ballot, and it was just in 2011 when the legislature passed legislation, which once again put us back to propositions on the ballot only in general elections of even number years. Why do you think? Because the Democratic majorities understood that propositions more amenable, shall we say, to the Democratic Party agenda were better off being on that general election ballot because the general election electorate tended to be more Democratic, while primary election electorates tend to have a significantly more weighty outcome of Republicans.
One slight correction.
What?
It's only initiatives and referenda that have to be on the November ballot.
That's true,
The legislature can put measures
Anywhere.
as they did.
but I'm
We had-
talking about the initiative process.
Right, we had 3 measures on the June ballot, all put on by the legislature.
And
There's no civility, is there? They're just disagreeing with each other, right?
Bob, you ignorant,
I wasn't ignorant on this one.
So, but let me ask both of you, do we need these schools? These are buildings. We talk about teachers, we talk about textbooks and programs. These
yeah,
are
but
buildings.
here's the opponent's argument. Schools need to be dealt with. However, the opponents say, and there is a grain of truth in this for sure, it's better to have it done on the local level. Let local school districts, local school boards, local parent-teachers associations, what have you,
Okay.
decide what's needed.
All right, so we need to move on. There's $10 million in support of this measure, 0 against it. I guess word of mouth they're counting on, so.
And Pat, in terms of newspaper editorials, which I take a look at, all the newspapers but one are opposed to this, including the LA Times, by the way, has editorialized against this. The only paper that's editorialized for it at this point is the San Francisco Chronicle. So the Sacramento Bee, for example, and the San Jose Mercury News, all against it. So interesting that most of the newspapers are saying we don't need these bonds. And of course, the concern is that wealthy districts will eat
That's
up.
the key.
We'll get the bonds before the less wealthy
Right.
districts.
Right.
Here,
Right.
that is an important point, and that is another opponent's argument, because the bonds are allocated on a first-come, first-served basis.
Yeah. So
It's
who's gonna
those
be
school
first in line?
boards and school districts that have the resources to put in the request for funds that will get the funds, and that's the richer, more organized, more upper
Right.
income districts.
Okay, so we have to move on. Proposition 52, which is, this is one of those wonky measures that you think, oh my God, what is this all about? There's a law right now that puts fees on hospitals. The hospitals pay X amount of millions of dollars a year to fund Medi-Cal services, and this measure would extend that indefinitely, but there's an argument that no, we need the money put to other health causes. So let's hear first from Sherry talking about who's in support of this. The number's $60 million in support, $11 million against.
That will tell you something. It's not a whole lot of deep pockets are against it. The hospitals, the private hospitals in particular, support this because they do pay a fee, which helps California get matching funds from the federal government for Medi-Cal. But in the end, the hospitals get more back than they put in. So they're not unhappy with making that fee permanent. It also, Prop 52 is supposed to prohibit the legislature from using the fee revenue for other purposes. Very often, and it doesn't only relate to Medi-Cal, what money that comes in to the legislature for a single purpose is often moved over to another purpose, either
Right, so-
because the budget is not what it should be or the priorities of the legislature are different.
So the word lockbox may mean
Yeah,
something.
well, maybe. I
Okay.
mean, I've never known a legislature that couldn't figure out some way to get what they want, where they
See,
wanted it.
if they're not criminals in one sense, they'll pick a lock in another one. Okay, so where would the money go then if this is not approved?
Well, this would not, it would go away once the sunset has been reached. This would make that fee permanent. But you can also increase the fee or decrease the fee, depending on the will of the legislature, and that depends on the lobbying.
Well, the legislature in the past has approved these fees, and what the Hospital Association wanted is to lock it into the Constitution so the legislature wouldn't be involved and wouldn't maybe take some of this money for the general fund. So I think the hospital said, let's go with an initiative so the legislature doesn't mess around with this. And so what it means is that the argument against it gives a blank check to the hospitals because the hospitals have written this initiative, it's for the hospitals, and the legislature can't monkey around with it since it's a constitutional amendment. Now, there's no organized opposition against this. So, and most of the newspapers have said yes on this.
And realize this, that the Constitution of the United States has, I think, 27 or 28 amendments. California's Constitution has more than 500 amendments.
It's
We are
well
almost
over
as long
20
as the Constitution of India. And this is another constitutional amendment being proposed and backed by the people you just heard about.
Exactly.
Right.
Let me tell you, let me just add something. This applies to almost every proposition we'll be talking to tonight. Here is an axiom of politics when you're looking at it from the perspective of the unions, of business, of medical groups, and the like, and social welfare groups. You can always rent a legislator, but you can buy exactly what you want if you have the money and the organization to do it through the initiative
And I
process.
strongly-
And this is a good example of it.
And I strongly disagree with Sherry on that.
Of course he does.
Because you can put anything on the ballot. That's absolutely true. If you have $3 million, anything can go on the ballot. 2/3 of these initiatives go down, and the last
Half
one,
and half in the last,
Two-
from 1996 to now.
Two-
50
over-
and 50.
and the last one that was put on the ballot by PG&E and by Mercury Insurance had all this money, and they both went down. So you cannot
does.
buy your way onto the ballot.
Now, Proposition 53 is, here's the money breakout, $5.5 million for it, almost $4 million against it. Among the big funders of this is a farmer in the Central Valley, because this doesn't necessarily have to do with farming per se, but here's what it would do. Again, another constitutional amendment that requires statewide voter approval before any revenue bonds can be issued by the state above $2 billion. Well, there are only two projects right now that fit this definition. One of them is the bullet train. The other one is the water in the tunnels to bring water through from the north down to Central California. So there's this farmer in the Central Valley who, with his wife, has put a ton of money to this because he says it isn't because of these two measures, it's about fiscal responsibility, but Governor Brown is taking this very personally. So,
And he
let's
should.
see. And he should. So who starts with this? Bob explains the support.
Yeah, this is for revenue bonds. Remember the education bond, Prop 51? We're voting on that. That's a general obligation bond where all the taxpayers must pay for that. A revenue bond is in contrast, is when you have a bond for a bridge or when you have a bond for maybe a train and the people pay revenue to ride the train or to go over the bridge. So revenue bonds at this point don't have to be approved by the voters. They just have to be approved by the legislature or by a local legislative body. The reason this farmer is doing this is what Pat said, but also he's saying, look, sometimes revenue bonds are not totally paid for by the revenues and taxpayers can be on the hook. Why shouldn't taxpayers have the opportunity to say, hey, we don't think this revenue bond should pass? And that's what he's trying to do, is to get approval from the voters on any bond over $2 billion.
Sherry?
Well, it is true, I think, even the legislative analysts indicated that only those two projects would meet the definition of the need to go before the voters. It's basically a one...
And we already voted on the bullet train, as you may remember.
It's basically a one-man band, Dino
Cortopassi.
Cortopassi.
And
who
his wife
is-
Joan.
And his wife Joan, that's right, is the community property state, have spent already something like $4.5 million of the $5.5 million that is supporting this particular proposition. What opponents are really leaning heavily on is the argument that it takes away local control. This means that voters in Los Angeles could turn down a project benefiting San Francisco, and you wouldn't want that to happen if you lived in the Bay Area. In fact, the most powerful television ad for this is basically the same ad in 5 different sections of the state, including San Diego, Sacramento, San
You just changed
Francisco.
the name of the city?
Exactly. You have a
Ooh.
different fireman or a different policeman, and we in Sacramento don't want those people in San Diego to tell us how we can spend our money. But there is the question of local control and whether or not it is more effective and more efficient to let localities have the say. And in addition, the opponents argue also that in reality, even the largest projects outside of these two are partnerships between the local communities and the state, and it's highly unlikely that any other projects will reach that threshold. So,
And Jerry Brown is not happy with this partly, and he's put a lot of money into the opposition to this because the bullet train is his baby, the water is his baby.
those
These
are
are
his
legacy projects.
Yes, that's the governor's legacy, and I don't think he's going to sit still to have it pulled out from under him.
And I was surprised to see that unions and the California Chamber of
Yes.
Commerce are both against it.
Yes.
Now, there's a marriage
Well,
for you. So there's a lesson. All right, we've been talking about Proposition 53, the revenue bonds and the big players there. Proposition 54, another constitutional amendment. My goodness, we're going to make it 600 before we're going on this. This is about ideally modernizing the legislature to put votes online, to put bills online, 72 hours online before the vote, that the legislature has to record its proceedings. You think we do now. We have C-SPAN and we have CalSPAN, but not every committee, not every set of hearings is aired, is put online.
And not recorded
And not
either.
recorded. And so this would cost maybe $1 million. There's $10 million in support of it, none against. But the legislature is really livid about this because they think anybody can just pull a piece of video off of this and use it in a campaign commercial, which of course we know is going to happen.
It has
So-
been done on the federal level. That's one of the reasons why the House decided it would take control of the cameras in
yeah.
the House
So
chamber.
this is supposedly about transparency, but let's hear first from Sherry about why the support is there for it.
First of all, I have to say, I have some questions about this, and I
Oh,
think
good.
maybe.
I'll support it,
Wait,
you oppose
wait,
it
wait.
then. Because this is my favorite
This is the
proposition.
kind of wheeling dealing that we see in Sacramento.
Do it, because then I'll have questions
I was
for
in
you.
Sacramento 13 years, and I saw what the legislature does. They will wait till the last minute to pass major bills. They will distribute the bills to the legislators on their desks and say, vote yes or no on these bills. What this provision says is all of us get 3 days, 72 hours, to take a look at these important bills before they can pass them.
If they do,
I mean, if they do.
nothing mandates that is an actuality, number one. Remember Bill Richardson's book, What Makes You Think We Read the Bills?
Well, the legislature might not read the bills, but the public will read the bills if it's 72
Oh,
hours.
now there's my major question. The public, it will be online. That in and of itself smacks a little bit of elitism. Who has access to the internet? It may separate out a significant portion of the electorate, or at least of the citizenry. Why only online? Why is that going to be the magic wand?
Well,
I think we should have Paul Revere riding through the
Yeah,
streets
right.
That
yelling
would
the
be good.
contents of the bill.
That would be good, because then everybody in the streets would be able to hear it.
I mean, I
But
suppose
you
we
need a
could.
bilingual horse and rider.
That would be true.
I suppose we
too.
could.
That would be taken care of by Prop 58.
This one is for transparency. It takes care of the gut and amend legislation that we've seen time after year,
Okay, so-
where nobody has a chance to take a look at these. This gives 72 hours. I had an initiative, by the way, that I wrote several years ago that said 12 days for amending the Political Reform Act. I would like to have it more than 72 hours, but the legislature obviously didn't put this on the ballot. It had to be by initiative. It had to be by a Charles.
rich person.
Well, of course. That's how you get initiatives on the ballot, is you have to have several $1 million.
Is this
Now,
the
Democrat-
billionaire's election?
The Democratic Party is against this. Some labor unions are against this because they say that special interests will be able to take a look at these and kill legislation that's important. I think this is the most important proposition on the ballot for all of us, for transparency and to ensure that the legislature passes legislation that they have read and, more importantly, that we have read.
Just to explain what gut and amend is, let me explain it this way. So you get up in the morning and you and your spouse are there in bed and you say, I'm going to go make some coffee. Then you go out, you get the coffee, you come back, and there's a different person wearing your spouse's pajamas. So gut and amend is a bill like Bill number 10, originating in the Assembly, that gets the contents are completely stripped out, only the number remains, and they put something else in that they want at the last minute. And this is something, when Bob says gut and amend, that's what he's talking about.
Bob, does it also banish what we used to call, and I don't know what they call them now, spot bills, which is something different because it does have a number and a title, but nothing inside of it.
No, well, it basically says the bill can't be passed by either house of the legislature in its final form unless it's been in print 72 hours. That's it.
Okay, so let's move on from Prop 54 to Prop 55, okay? Another constitutional amendment, my goodness. The Founding Fathers would still be signing, you know, if they had a constitution like this. Do you remember Prop 30 in 2012, which was extending the income tax on upper earners? Part of the reason we're so dependent on income tax in California is because of Prop 13, because it's essentially hamstrung when it comes to property taxes. So now it's all about income tax, which is a much more fluctuating kind of source. So Prop 30, and you know who was the best campaigner for Prop 30? Was Jerry Brown's dog, Sutter Brown. I still have the little baseball card from Sutter. Sutter is very, very ill with cancer. But Sutter came out and he like posed with everybody, so I have my picture of Sutter Brown.
He did his own tour of the state.
He did his campaign tour. So this would extend Proposition 30 by 12 years, which is the term that you can spend in the legislature, which means that if you're in the legislature when this starts, you're going to be gone by the time it's over, so you don't even have to deal with nasty questions of increasing it. There is now $50 million in support of this, 0 in opposition. So let's see, who have we got? We have Bob taking the lead on the support.
Yeah,
Bob, give us your $50 million worth.
More than that. By the way, again, the legislature did not put this on the ballot because they couldn't agree to it. By the way, there's a sales tax also as part of Prop 30. That's going to expire at the end of this year, the 1/4% sales increase. Now, I'm sure all of you are going to be affected by this because it affects anybody who's earning over $300,000 a year, and I'm sure everybody here is going to be affected by that.
And whoever you are buying the next round.
For everybody.
And the percent goes from 9.3% to 13.3%. It basically keeps it the way it is right now for 12 more years. The money goes only to schools and to healthcare programs. And of course, the question is, should the wealthy pay more in taxes? A progressive tax system that we have, they can afford to pay for schools.
Well, the major opponent of this is the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. It is a conservative cause. Mainly Republicans are actively opposing it. The teachers' unions, other unions, some of the hospitals are among those who contributed to that $50 million budget there. One of the people who is staying quiet is Governor Brown, and I assume Sutter also, although he has much more important things on his mind right now. But the governor hasn't taken a side. He has said, well, when I campaigned for Prop 30, I said it would be temporary. It is temporary, let's leave it at that. But in his budget message, in his press availability with all of his charts, he was very careful to show what might happen to the revenues we are getting from Prop 30 if those revenues dried up. And there were large red bars below the balanced budget line.
So that's Prop 55, built off Prop 30, and you can decide for yourselves, as I said, with the money distribution. On the next one, Prop 56, opposition is spending almost 3 times more than support, $56 million with more to come in opposition, $22 million in support of a measure that would, again, a constitutional amendment, would take us from about the lowest tax state when it comes to cigarette taxes to almost the highest by adding $2 per pack for the cost of cigarettes, including vaping, all you hipsters. So, let's see Sherry Bebitch Jeffe on the yes on 56.
Well, you know, gee, do I really have to explain this one?
Well, we came very close to passing this.
No. I mean, the arguments in favor are obvious. They've been given before, and before they have been defeated. But after Bob finishes with his opposition, I want to talk a little bit about that. But it's a health issue. It's an economic issue. It will raise money for the state. People are killed by cigarette smoking, and it doesn't take any money, the supporters say, from schools, from hospitals. It does protect school funding, and it still keeps our kids from getting too much involved too easily with smoking or vaping.
Is it because it prices it out of
You
their
bet.
reach? Yeah. And the money, by the way, the opposition, as you would expect, the bulk of it is coming.
Big tobacco.
I think they just paid for this microphone, too. The tobacco industry. Bob?
Well, I'm a lawyer, so I have to argue against this. I was on the board of directors of Americans for Non-Smokers' Rights, so this really hurts as I'm about to give you these comments against it.
This is a test of your debating skills.
Okay. The money for this proposition goes to greedy special interests.
Yeah, it's like a hostage video, isn't it?
Like the insurance companies and hospitals who are funding the initiative. This hurts poor people who smoke because they would be paying more in taxes. The smoking rates are already at an
Don't
all-time.
laugh, it's in your ballot.
Smoking rates are already at an all-time low. What this proposition is part of a plan to ban smoking altogether.
Now, what I did not see in any of the ballot arguments, yes, give a hand to poor Bob, who was
Yeah.
straining for that one. What I didn't see is the question of whether we would become like New York, whether people start smuggling cigarettes into the state, whether you get a black market for that.
Pat, that's how big tobacco defeated other attempts to put this in the Constitution, exactly that.
Well, California is in the middle of the pack right now. In fact, we don't tax cigarettes as much as other states do.
Right.
So we're actually not, it would bring us up to what other states are doing.
But there's kind of a red herring argument in some of the ads because you have teachers saying the money's not going to go to schools. Well, it wasn't ever going to go to schools, right?
That's
It was
right.
going to go
It's-
to health education.
It's designated. The argument is that when you have a general tax increase under the Prop 98, about half the money has to go to schools.
Right.
And
A little over 40%.
this is an exemption from that
So
proposition.
it's dedicated to
Right.
smoking
Right,
issues.
so it won't have a place in the formula which will distribute the
It
general
goes-
fund monies to the school.
It goes to greedy special interests like hospitals.
Yeah. You know, we voted on this in 2006 and 2012, another tobacco tax
Right.
extension, and it failed both times.
Now, Bob and I have been having this argument. I know it's ridiculous. We don't ever argue. But he's insisting that it will fail again. And look at the difference in the amount of money. 22 million, yes. 56 million, no.
And you've got another 3 weeks yet to spend
But,
money on this.
but I think times have changed. Public opinion has changed. I think the whole issue of vaping is a new dynamic in this. I'm not at all sure, and we like our taxes when they don't, when sin taxes are cool now. We're more likely, if we have to tax ourselves by sin taxes. So I do think this has a chance of making it this time around.
Well, I hope Sherry is right, but we did a book called Democracy by Initiative. We found that 90% of the time, when big money is spent against an initiative, it fails. Now, big money spent for an initiative doesn't mean it's going to pass, but 90% of the time, if a lot of money is spent against it, even if a lot of money is spent for it, it goes down. So this has a 90%, in my mind, chance of losing. I hope Sherry is right.
I will bet you that the largest percentage of that 90% were more narrow economic issues of concern to those opponents, because as an issue becomes more socialized, more widely debated, touching more people rather than a significant, tiny little slice of a group, of an electorate, of an industry,
Okay.
it's more likely
See,
to
when you
pass.
get confused, you vote no, and that's what they're trying to do, is confuse you.
All right, so Proposition 57, you've already heard about some of the early release programs that we have had set in motion again by a vote of California voters that brings people from state prison back into their communities. That is already contentious. Proposition 57 goes back to an old model that gave judges a little more authority in sentencing. It was not called determinate sentencing. This goes back maybe 30 or some years. And this Proposition 57 is about nonviolent prisoners' early release. And the question is, what is a violent crime? Because there's some crimes here like arson, rape of an intoxicated or unconscious person, domestic violence, which don't get classified as violent crimes under here. And that's where a lot of the argument is going. So Proposition 57, which is also keeping in mind, you've got $8 million in support of it, $200,000 against it. Keep in mind that California's prisons have been under federal mandate for more than a dozen years because of overcrowding circumstances. And this is one answer to this, to save money, to change sentencing, and to let people who have been convicted of some of these nonviolent crimes maybe get early release. Not too early, but certainly when their probation comes up. Parole, excuse
So
me.
remember, by the way, every time Pat cites you a figure of $8 million, subtract $3 million from that, or $4 million, because that's what they spent to qualify the measure on the yes side. So remember, every time there's a yes money, subtract 3 or 4 million. Now, this is supported by Jerry Brown, supported by Police Chief Charlie Beck here in Los Angeles, and it allows early parole for nonviolent felons, but the parole board has to approve the release. So they go, it's not an automatic release, it has to go to them. It also lets judges decide, not prosecutors, who is to be tried as an adult. Remember, we're under court order to reduce our prison population. And we've reduced it already from 173,000 to 128,000, but our prisons are overcrowded. And the idea of this proposition is to say, okay, instead of having to serve at least 2 years as a felon, under this proposition, it'd be about 1.5 years if the parole board approves, reduces our prisons, saves us a whole bunch of money, and also complies with the court order.
But DAs and cops are against it for the most part, Sherry.
Pretty much, and the victims' rights groups are pretty much against it, and certainly most of the major prosecutors in the state are against it. The arguments are that it would weaken California's anti-crime bills, which are weakened already. In the last few years, we've loosened up a little on the 3 strikes bill, for example, and they are criticizing the measure for poor drafting. They say there are a lot of loopholes in it, and the opponents are using the Brock Turner Stanford sexual assault case, saying this wouldn't.
That under this law, that would not be considered a violent crime.
That's
But
what
he would
they
still
argue.
serve time. So it's a
I'm
question
just telling you what the opponents are doing.
you'll be seeing, by the way, a
You
whole,
can't go to every television set and say, don't believe what they're telling you about Brock Turner.
you'll be seeing lots of ads for this coming up, and you're now seeing some ads against it as well. The newspapers, by the way, are really split down the middle on this. LA Times does support it.
And the other point of this measure is that it gives criminals an incentive to behave themselves in prison, to take seriously the rehabilitation part of corrections, the Department of Corrections, and to apply themselves if the programs are available, which is another matter,
Yeah.
to say, I've got a motive, I've got an incentive, I've got a goal line in sight to do that. So that is Proposition 57. Let's see, Proposition 58 is a battle we have fought before. English proficiency, English as a second language, English immersion. 1998, the state of California said, no, we don't want to have this kind of bilingual education that we have in place now. This would repeal most of Prop 227, which was the English in the Public Schools initiative, and go back to a model, a more advanced model, certainly as time has gone by, about teaching kids in their own language, which has been seen to be, by some people, to be an advantage to be bilingual, which it was not maybe 15 or 20 years ago when this measure was passed. So let's see, that's Proposition 58, and Sherry's going to explain the support. By the way, it's $1 million for it, nothing against it so far.
And it's $1 billion. I mean, $1 million here, $1 million there, maybe will add up
That's
to
Edward
real money.
Dirksen's line.
You
This,
know,
this
yeah.
was put on by the legislature. That's why it's only $1
Oh,
million.
that's why it's a referendum, yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
No, it's
Or,
not.
I'm sorry,
It's a
initiative
it's a
status.
legislative initiative statute. It is not a constitutional
So it's not
amendment.
up from the people
But,
being anybody with $1 million.
Teachers' organizations, community organizations, some parent-teacher organizations are supporting it. Remember that, again, demography has changed, public opinion has changed. We passed by a significant percentage the Proposition 227 that tightened and mandated teaching English only in 1998, as you said, which was only 4 years after They Keep Coming, Proposition 187. And as you, I think, appropriately mentioned, there is a reasoning now, and part of the argument for this is that every child should be at least bilingual, if that is possible. And it will allow non-Spanish speaking, English only speaking children to learn Mandarin, to learn Japanese, to learn Korean in those programs which can be established, which might not have been available to them under Prop 227.
So, Bob, ¿qué dice?
Yes.
Hey, what?
I'm sorry, I'll have to arrest you for asking that question.
So Ron Unz was the proponent of Prop 227. He argues that the ban on bilingual education has worked and school scores are up because of the ban. He said this would give the legislature free rein to establish Spanish almost only classes. And so he is continuing to oppose this, saying, you voted for this in 1998 as an initiative. The legislature shouldn't be changing it. The legislature shouldn't be given the opportunity to pass legislation that would gut this.
And there are some serious numbers that Ron Unz brings to the fore to show that the kind of education we have now, the immersion and the quick mainstreaming, has actually worked.
Well, I don't know that there is a direct causality that's been
That's the
established.
question, whether it's...
There is no indication. You can't say he's wrong. You cannot say he is right. And one of the arguments of the supporters is that this initiative or this bill would allow a better, more clear collection of data. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's false, but that's one of the arguments.
Well, Ron Unz will cite study after study showing that school scores went up after this ban was put into effect.
But we don't know if it was because of this ban, and I can tell you, being at least part of me an academic, you can have a study tell you anything you want it to tell you. And Ron Unz knows that. And I do too.
So as one thing I will point out is that, as you see, one of the advantages and drawbacks is that we are directing government through the ballot box. Sometimes it's the legislature that refuses to act on a difficult issue and punts it to the voters. And sometimes it's something like this, that some interest group, and not this particular, but many of these issues on the ballot, you might say, are an interest group that didn't get its way in the legislature, and therefore it says, I'm going to go to the voters, I'll show you. And so this idea of direct democracy can sometimes run a little bit amok, I think, and as we see in...
Well, I would disagree with that. It's when the legislature doesn't respond to what the public wants in terms of the marijuana initiative, in terms of the 72-hour rule, in terms of the initiative that I wrote dealing with campaign disclosure and limiting how much lobbyists could... The legislature never was going to pass this initiative. Term limits, there are many, many issues that the legislature refuses to address. Gun control, the legislature did do it a little bit this year.
Quite a bit.
They did a little bit this
quite a
year
bit.
finally, but marijuana, death penalty, the legislature won't touch that.
They don't want to be campaigning
I
against
think
on
it's
this.
absolutely essential that we have the initiative process to allow us to go around the legislature and give us the opportunity to vote on major issues
But
like
it has
this.
been abused.
Yeah, Bob, that was
Do you think-
the original rationale for the initiative process, to allow California's ordinary citizens to go around the special interest groups and
With the
around the
railroads, for
legislature,
starters.
the railroads, the banks. And what has happened is it's become a tool of the special interests, of the railroads, of the
So
labor
can we agree
unions,
it's not
of
an
the bar.
unalloyed success?
Well,
I-
guess
hang on, Sherry,
would
hang on,
I
hang
would
on.
take a survey here. What do people have more confidence in?
Oh, well,
The
it's
legislative
the-
process or the initiative process?
initiative
And my
process.
guess is that more people here would have confidence in the initiative process than the legislative process.
No?
Well,
Ooh. it's like the
surveys
House of
across the
Commons.
state would say 2/3 of the people have more confidence in the initiative process. I know we don't like initiatives. I understand that. We don't like to
And
vote on
one
all
other
of them.
point, Bob is talking about it's for the citizen to get around the legislature. Almost every initiative that you mentioned has a sugar daddy,
Okay.
a very rich sugar daddy.
All right, so we have to speed...
That ain't the citizens.
We have to speed this up and move along. We have Proposition 59, which is strictly advisory, saying that we don't like Citizens United. This wins the prize for being the one with the least amount of money being spent on it, $77,000 in favor. Nothing against. We haven't heard a peep from the Supreme Court about this, so...
That tells you something.
Prop 59, Bob, would you explain the support,
Well,
please?
this was put on by the legislature. That's why there's no money, obviously, in it. And this one is probably the most meaningless one that you'll be voting on, but it's the one that probably 75 to 80% of us will vote yes on because we don't like what the United States Supreme Court did on Citizens United. We believe in more campaign finance, maybe except for Sherry, we believe in more campaign finance control.
Wait a minute. Would you excuse me for a minute?
And we want to overturn Citizens United, and we want to have restrictions on how much money can be spent in elections. So this doesn't do anything, because all it does is tell the legislature, do everything you can to overturn Citizens United. Well, frankly, it's going to either take a constitutional amendment, U.S. constitutional amendment, number 28, by the way, if it passed.
Oh, thank you.
And, or it would take a change in the United States Supreme Court, because the vote on Citizens United was 5-4, allowing corporations and labor unions to spend unlimited amounts of money on independent expenditures.
Sherry,
The
nobody's spending anything against this.
Why? It's meaningless.
All right.
You know, I mean, that's the key. It will not change anything. And what worries me, quite frankly, is, and I don't think, I need to worry because nobody knows anything about it. Everybody who looks at this and said, this is really cool. We've got to get rid of Citizens United.
It's not
Nothing's going to happen, and it's not going to develop any greater trust in our legislative institutions,
No, but it's
federal or
30X
state.
million Californians saying, yeah.
Well,
Anyway.
the interesting thing, by the way, is the
strictly-
Legal in Voters is against this.
Wow,
Yeah.
okay.
Just to let you know. I mean, I'm
Put,
trying to be
well, we
fair.
need to move on pretty quickly. So that's the Citizens United advisory vote. Proposition 60 requires adult film performers to use condoms in filming, makes producers pay for vaccinations and testing, and requires producers to post the condom requirement. And this could turn you, yes, you, into a whistleblower, because if you see a porn movie where nobody, and I know nobody here watches them, where somebody is not wearing a condom, you're supposed to report it, and you may get a little whistleblower, not
George
whistleblower.
Skelton calls them condom cops.
Right. You may get a little percentage of the take there. So we have $4 million in support, about 400,000, a tenth of it against it. LA County passed this some years ago, and as you would expect, and as was predicted, a lot of the porn industry moved out of Los Angeles County. So let's see, who drew the straw on this one?
I
Prop
did.
60. Sherry, the support of this.
Yeah, right. My libertarian streak prevents me from being in
No,
support of
come on.
I don't believe that something like this should be on a statewide ballot. I mean, this is it's very close to the government sticking its nose into our bedrooms. I mean, if you're not adult enough to understand what might happen to you, then that's your problem.
Well,
it's
I
not
was-
the government's problem.
I was supposed to argue against this, but now I have to argue for it.
Thank you for being a trooper.
All right, the reason for this
Don't
is
rub it in.
I would use a condom.
You owe me one,
Bada
sir.
bing. Okay, we need to move on, so. That's the blue nose in the back telling me that. So, all right, so we have that one, Proposition 60. So we're good on that. Proposition 61 is a complicated issue about prescription drugs. It's complicated by what the federal government has done. It's complicated by Martin Shkreli, if that is his name, raising the price of EpiPens or whatever else he named it. So this is a measure that, let me find the money here. There's $86 million against it, $14 million in favor of it, and it means that the state could not buy prescription drugs from a drug manufacturer at a price that's above that's being paid by the VA right now, which is a negotiated kind of huge market kind of price. It exempts some state programs. What it would do to the state budget, you don't know, but it is a big deal for the pharmaceutical industry. So who is taking the lead on 61? That's Bob explaining support for it.
Yeah, this is sponsored by the AIDS Foundation. It deals with prescription drugs, which are way overpriced, as most of us know, allows the state to reduce its costs for state employees and certain Medi-Cal programs. Probably doesn't affect most of you unless you're a state employee. The state spends nearly $4 billion a year on drugs, and this will set an example for the rest of the country, and that's why you're seeing all the ads against it. The drug companies are really, really concerned about this because, first of all, we're California, but secondly, if we pass this, watch other states pass it as well.
Well, not surprisingly, of the opponents, the major opponents is Big Pharma, the drug companies. But there are a couple of interesting arguments that the opponents bring up. This covers only a small arbitrary group of Californians, which include, of course, Medi-Cal patients, at about
Which is 1 in 3 insured Californians.
which and 88% of the state, according to the opposition, of all Californians are excluded. And another thing, again, beware the unintended consequences of reform. Part of the argument of the opponents is it wouldn't matter because what the drug companies would do, and it's kind of an interesting argument for Big Pharma to make, would be to raise the price for the VA. Therefore, the prices would be higher for Californians whose price is tied to that of what the VA pays.
The larger threat, the health or the pharmaceuticals say that we could, if you pass this, we could cut the cost of R&D. Well, they spend, I think, and I don't know if this is the case. Is this true? More money on marketing than on R&D right now?
Spend a lot on marketing.
Okay, so that would say, you
Look
could.
at the imbalance in the contributions for this particular
Right, so you
initiative.
see where that's coming
Although
from.
I have to say
And-
also, arguing against my pro side on this, the California Medical Association is against it. All the major newspapers are against this as well.
And so the bottom line that I think the LA Times said is, would anybody be spending $100 million on a measure that would bring it more revenue?
Yeah.
And that, I think, was the salient point. So that's Proposition 61. Proposition 62 is one of 2 ballot measures on the death penalty. My understanding is if they both pass, that the one that gets more votes becomes law. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so let's start with Proposition 62. Californians have been voting over more than 40 years on whether or not to ban the death penalty in California. And this is yet another one. The numbers may be shifting on this. Sherry can explain some of those support. And the numbers for money are pretty much the same. $6 million in support, about $4 million against.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's quite evenly divided. I think that the supporters, the one argument, and you'll see this again and again, interestingly, even with regard to strong social welfare-focused initiative, is that it's going to save the state money. It's going to help the state comply with the federal directive with regard to overcrowding of prison. It will save the state, according to supporters, $150 million every year.
This is the amount of money that's spent on the required
All of this,
constitutional
right.
appeals to the
All of
idea of the death penalty, because
the
this would.
long appeals process, which will be dealt with in another initiative. It also, they argue, removes the risk that innocent people may be executed. The whole question of exoneration.
Right, which
is
you've seen
dealt
in the
with here.
Innocence Project.
And it gives, the supporters say, the families of victims more complete closure. Guilty, locked up forever. So those are the major arguments that supporters have given.
And let me point out that the last execution we had in California was in 2006. The man had been on death row for 24 years, and there was a judge who said the leading cause of death on death row is old age.
That's right.
So, Bob?
Yeah, some crimes, I'm arguing against this. Some crimes require the ultimate punishment. People on death row have killed 226 kids, 43 peace officers, and the argument is, if you don't have a death penalty, how do we protect peace officers who are guarding these prisoners? California voters have always approved the death penalty. Last time was in 2012, 48%, 52% voted for the death penalty. As Pat said, 103 people have died in prison who are on death row. There are 748 with death sentences right now. 32 DAs believe that we should keep the death penalty.
And this is essentially amend it or end it. There are 2 measures, as I said, on the ballot. This is an end it part. We'll get to the amend it part with the death penalty statute, Proposition 62, and moving on up in a minute from that. So, Proposition then 63, let me find, oh, there's so much death penalty stuff here. This is another hot button issue. Gun measures always get people out. You may remember the Chris Rock sketch where he talks about charging $1,000 for a bullet. And he's talking, and he imagines an argument between 2 guys, and one guy says, I'm going to blow your head off. I'm going to go out. I'm going to get me a job. I'm going to earn $1,000, and I'm going to buy me a bullet and blow your head off. And then I'm going to take the bullet back out of your head because it's so expensive. This, Proposition 63, because gun regulation is so difficult, this regulates ammunition sales, requires lost and stolen guns to be reported. Right now, you're supposed to do it, but there's no real enforcement about that. Makes gun theft a felony, and also begins to track more closely the people who are not legally entitled to have guns and whether they have them. So Prop 63, the main supporter is Gavin Newsom, who is the lieutenant governor, who obviously probably wants to be, I think obviously probably is a contradiction, but is looking to be governor himself. Sherry, can you explain the support for this?
Well, the supporters argue that Prop 63 will save lives by preventing dangerous criminals, domestic abusers, and the dangerously mentally ill from obtaining and using such deadly weapons, and it will protect the right of law-abiding Californians to own guns for self-defense, hunting, and recreation. And now I'm going to defend it as Gavin Newsom. It will help me get around campaign contribution limitations as I begin to prepare to run for governor. It will help me gain visibility in the state and gain recognition.
Such a cynic, isn't she?
No. Studies indicate. This began in earnest in 1990 when John Vandekamp, who was running for the Democratic nomination for governor, qualified 3 initiatives for the ballot. And since that time, even though he lost the nomination, didn't even make it to the general election, candidates for higher office, including Jerry Brown.
Well, let's go back to 1974.
1974, Prop 9 have used the initiative process as a springboard to the attempt for higher office.
But let's talk about what it would actually do, and one of the things that it would...
Well, except that much of it has been passed into law.
And Jerry Brown just signed a law this year that dealt
That's
with some
right.
of this already, but there's the backlog.
It was a very
of
personal
people with
fight
guns who
between the
shouldn't have them.
President pro tem of the Senate, Kevin DeLeon, and the Lieutenant Governor, Gavin Newsom. So there are a couple of little tweaks in the legislation, but that's about it.
The fascinating part about this is that the National Rifle Association is not spending very much money against this. They're focusing on Nevada and a little bit on Maine, which also have 2 measures dealing with the same subject. The argument against this is really the legislature took care of this. Why do we have an initiative on the ballot? Now, almost all the newspapers are supporting this.
It also
so
limits the size of magazine
Yeah,
clips, to 10.
But so the main argument against this is we've already taken care of this in the legislature.
And again, because in California, only about 1/3 of registered voters are gun owners, there is probably
right.
the writing on the wall about where this may very well go. A lot of the editorial support that you see is in support of this. So Prop 64, smoke them while you got them. This would just flat out legalize marijuana in California. We're getting close with medical marijuana because all you got to do is go in and say, ow, I fell off my skateboard. But 6 years ago, we were asked to make this all legal recreational. We said no. Maybe things have changed. So Prop 64, Sherry, who's supporting this and why? And will they remember what day election day is?
Again, do I really need to explain why? I mean, let's be serious here. Well, the most enticing argument is the economic argument. Again, we look at Colorado in particular, and Colorado is nearby. Not only have we had 2 decades of experience with medical marijuana, but we're watching, particularly Colorado, who has apparently really has developed a boom in selling marijuana, in edibles. Tourism has increased to places where nobody ever toured before. I wonder why in Colorado. And that's attractive to a lot of Californians. And they're talking about revenues of over $1 billion. And it would reduce law enforcement costs. One of the arguments is it will let our law enforcement and our first responders be free to really go after serious crimes, major emergencies, and not go around writing tickets for marijuana possession. And again, similar to my argument about the role of Colorado, we've seen 4 other states go through this, and we've used their experience to put into this initiative statute. So we've used the best practices. It's not going to be wild-eyed reefer madness.
So let me set it up for Bob, which is the sense, in 2012, one of the reasons a measure like this failed was because it did seem messy. It didn't seem very precise as to regulations and penalties. One of the complaints about medical marijuana was exactly that. It didn't say how many places could open up or how this would be dealt with. So if you can talk about what some of the pushback on 64 is.
Sure. This is one where, frankly, I am not sure how I'm going to vote. I know my son, who's in the audience, is voting yes, and I think the older people like me are questioning, wondering whether we're going to vote yes or no. But let me give you the arguments against. If you're against smoking tobacco, shouldn't you be also against smoking marijuana? What are the health implications for increasing the use of marijuana? What about driving under the influence? There are no tests for it right now. In Colorado and Washington State, we've seen major increases in terms of driving under the influence. Dianne Feinstein, our United States Senator, is against this. The California Hospital Association is against this. And this is the longest proposition on the ballot. Try to read this proposition and understand it. It is very long. So for those reasons, those are the arguments against it. As I say, I'm not sure how I'm going to vote on this.
And now, Bob, given the electorate that it tends to be older and whiter, what do you think? Do you have any sense from polling what would happen?
I think this is going to pass because there's no moneyed opposition against it. The interesting, the newspapers are very split on this, yes and no on this. I think it has a good chance of passing because I think it was defeated by a very narrow margin last time. And I think that they have now talked to enough special interest groups to alleviate most of the opposition except for the Hospital Association. So my guess is, unless all of you decide to vote no on all the propositions, and because there are 17, 40% of you, not you necessarily here, but 40% of people will vote no on everything. Just as a way to just say, we don't like this system, we're going to vote no on it. So the yes side always has a lot more to overcome.
And this is being outspent by the support by 8 to 1.
Oh yeah, there's very little opposition at this point.
It's big tobacco and big weed. They're
The
pretty much
tobacco
fear is the
big
big
weed.
tobacco is going to take over
You bet.
all the mom and pop marijuana stores that we have right now, and big tobacco will use this as a way to enhance their profits.
And don't underestimate the change in our culture and in public opinion toward the use of marijuana.
So Prop 65 is one of two measures on the ballot having to do with plastic bags in grocery stores. This legislature passed a ban in 2014, but it doesn't take effect yet. In the meantime, out-of-state plastic bag manufacturers have been putting money into these two measures, which are contradictory and a little confusing. And once again, I think, am I right, Bob, that if they both pass, whichever gets more votes is the one that takes effect?
No, because 65 will only go into effect, this is the initiative, only go into effect if 67 passes. The plastic bag people are trying to confuse people. 67 is a referendum. What is a referendum? The legislature passed a bill in 2014. The plastic bag industry was very much against that, so they circulated a petition to say, we want to repeal that bill. So 67 is, should you support what the legislature passed, which is a ban on plastic bags?
Yes or no?
Should you vote no against plastic bags? The industry obviously
Which will nullify
the industry is
bill.
obviously hoping you'll vote no. If 67 passes, if the referendum passes banning plastic bags, then 65 makes a difference. Because 65 says the money that is collected by the grocers will go to environmental funds as opposed to going to the grocers. Now, the interesting thing is the environmental groups are against 65 because they say it's confusing people.
So did they simply put 65 on the ballot, frankly, to confuse people rather than just an up or down vote on a bag ban?
That's my opinion, and also to have another proposition on the ballot so voters say, too many on the ballot, let's vote no on everything.
So which would effectively end the plastic bag ban
And if you
put
voted-
condoms back in the trees again.
There you go. And if you voted yes on 67, or if you voted no, it wouldn't matter what you did on 65 because, as Bob said, if a statewide ban on single-use carry-out grocery bags is enacted. So if you're so confused, you vote no. It doesn't matter what you do on 65.
Yeah.
And I think that, that's an important part of it. And another argument that the opponents use is that what we're doing with 65 is ballot box budgeting. We keep earmarking certain revenues for certain programs, certain policies. and we are losing flexibility to deal with the ups and downs of California's
Well,
economy and budget process.
And this is
Although
why,
that 65 really doesn't deal with that because it's 65, the money that goes to the grocers now. But the interesting thing, has
No,
anybody
but it
seen
would
an
have
ad?
to go to environmental.
Has anybody seen an ad against 67? Because I haven't. Which surprised
No.
me is the plastic bag industry has not been spending much money
yeah,
against
they're
67.
putting their money into the $6 million into this from the plastic bag industry.
Yeah, but that was to circulate the measure. That was just to
And then a
circulate.
lot more in the ads you've been seeing. So
Yeah.
voting yes or no on voting yes on Prop 67 would make Prop 65 moot.
No. Voting
have it
yes
wrong?
on 67 then would have 65 go into effect
All
if
right,
it
so-
passes.
Okay.
Unless, if
So just-
65 doesn't get 50% plus one,
All
and
right, vote,
67
if,
does.
how do you vote when we're going to get to a minute? So if you want to keep the plastic bag ban in place, you vote
Yes on 67, and then you decide where you want the money to go on 65.
if it ever gets to that. All right, so that's 65. Now we have the second part of the death penalty measure. This is a proposition that would speed up an initiative, that would speed up the death penalty process. No more 25 years on death row. The spending again here almost equals support 4.7 million against $6.5 million. This may be, again, this is the choice between two approaches on the death penalty in the state of California: to ban it altogether, to end it, or in this case, to amend it. Prop 66, Sherry, the support for it, obviously a lot of law enforcement here.
Yeah, well, yeah. And the argument that the supporters give is that our death penalty system in California is, quote, broken, but it should be amended, not ended. There could be some tweaking, making procedures flow, making procedures go faster. And they also argue that the costs of speeding up the death penalty appeals process would save taxpayers, here we go, the economic argument again, $30 million annually.
Compared to the $150 million that
Right.
they say ending the death penalty. So the argument isn't really over money at this point. It's a very philosophical
It's a
one.
very
Bob?
ideological, philosophical
Right, and
argument.
we'd come close to passing this before.
The argument against this is that some people are exonerated after many, many years. We have new DNA tests, and 5 years is just too short a time to spend. We shouldn't be killing innocent people. Now, fascinating, the opponents to this are two candidates who are going to be running against each other, probably for governor. That would be Gavin Newsom and Antonia Villaraigosa.
And how are they split?
And they're
They're
both
not
against
split.
it.
Oh, they're both, okay.
Yeah.
So is it conceivable that both of the death penalty measures would pass, in which case, what the hell happens?
Well, then if both pass, let's assume that you vote for both of them, you vote to ban the death penalty, and you vote to speed up death penalty,
You can do that, you know.
okay? And
can do
that
that.
happens, it happens. Whichever gets the most yes votes prevails in its entirety.
Correct.
So you might say, 53% of you might say, let's ban the death penalty, and 54% of you have said, no, let's speed it up. The 54% prevails.
See?
And
Legislator for a day?
And polls do indicate, as Bob mentioned earlier, that Californians, by and large, are still supportive of the death penalty, although less supportive, still over a majority, but less supportive than they have been previously.
My guess is probably both get defeated. That's my guess.
Wow.
Now, all the newspapers are against, by the way, 66, the speeding up the process, and the newspapers on 62 are supporting it.
We're going to be taking your questions in a couple of minutes. We get to the last measure on the ballot. You thought we'd never get there. Proposition 67, again, this is about plastic bags, a referendum. This is whether or not to uphold what the legislature did in 2014, which is enact this ban statewide. Dozens of cities, including Los Angeles and others, have already said no plastic bags. The legislature followed along. Once it saw that everybody else was in favor of it, it finally decided, I guess we can do that too. But this measure, a yes vote approves, a no vote rejects that law that we already passed in California to ban these single-use plastic bags. So let's go for the support explanation to Bob.
Well, we've already basically discussed this, so I don't think we need to go through it more. Jerry Brown supports this, Sierra Club supports this. Many, many cities have it. Even if you turn this down, you probably won't be seeing plastic bags because LA and major cities already have banned the plastic bags. But this is a statewide ban, And it's important for people, the environmental groups saying we should not have plastic bags throughout the state.
And this is being outspent, the opposition is spending twice as much as the support for this, again, the out-of-state plastic bag.
Because of the
Unless I misread it.
because it's a referendum, they had to put it on the ballot. That's why.
It
That's
costs
all.
that much
They're
to
just
get
spending. I think they just spent the money to put it on the ballot, and they're not spending very much money on the ads.
Sherry?
Now, the way I read it, and I may be reading it wrong, is that those localities that now have laws on the books are exempted. Their laws will remain. And one of the arguments of the opponents is there still won't be a statewide ban, because one uniform procedure for all of this, because 150 cities are somewhat exempt from this. Am I misreading it?
Well,
I looked at that and I said, no,
Well,
wait a minute, what is this?
Well, if you vote no, the city and county bans will stay in effect.
Yes.
If you vote yes, there'll be a statewide uniform ban.
Okay. Before we take questions, if you want to line up at
Covered by 270.
the back in the center. Claire is there, our in-person team member, so we can get some of your questions. And we'll be hanging around a little bit afterwards, too, so you can ask a question as well. But before we go to the audience questions, I want each of you, with your experience, to assess how these ballot measures, just as a whole, differ from some of the moods, the thinking of voters in the legislature that we've seen in the past.
Well, I think, in a sense, I found most of these, with a few exceptions, to be fairly easy in terms of what the concept is. They're not that complicated. A few of them are, but most of them are fairly, I mean, again, getting down to sex, drugs, death, and money, most of those you can figure out for yourselves, I think, without our help. There are a few of them, I think 57, dealing with the felons. That one's a little complicated. I think the one maybe dealing with the revenue bonds might be complicated, but most of the others are fairly straightforward. And again, most of the others are on the ballot because the legislature just didn't address the issues.
And these are issues about which voters tend to have very decided opinions
Yeah,
anyway.
I think so, one way or the other. And I think you'll see many of them passing more than usual, perhaps, but still probably a majority going down.
Sherry?
Well, I was kind of fascinated by the fact that you could pick out initiatives that were perhaps more liberal than the general electorate and others that are perhaps more conservative than the general electorate. That's always been the case, I think. You can see initiatives that fall in the category of ballot box budgeting, tightening the noose around the legislature's neck as to what can be spent and where it can be sent. What really stuck out to me was how wealthy individuals are more and more influencing what goes on the ballot as ballot propositions, and may even be influencing, I'm not sure yet, but may even be influencing the outcome of those ballot initiative campaigns.
Yeah, one point on that, I agree with Sherry on that. The big problem in my mind is how we qualify measures for the ballot. If any of you have $3 million, you can put almost anything on the ballot. If you don't have $1.5 million, you probably can't put anything on the ballot. I actually drafted initiative number 18 that dealt with banning lobbyist gifts, requiring more campaign disclosure. I had somebody who put up $1 million, but not more than that, and we didn't qualify. Our polls showed that would pass by 70%. The problem is we need to change the way we put things on the ballot.
Okay, so I think we're ready for some questions. So if you want to step on up to the microphone, which Claire is going to hold on to, and give us your query.
Hi, yeah, for Proposition 57, I wanted to know if you knew where the definitions of violent versus nonviolent crime come from. Is that from the initiative itself, or is that decided somewhere else?
Yeah, there were categories of crimes that sounded kind of violent that were exempted from this, like arson and the Brock Turner case. So I don't know if you guys want to
Well,
speak to
I think it's going to be up to the parole board to make judgments on that. And the opposition is talking about, well, it doesn't define it. I think that's right, because I think it gives the parole board, so, as they have right now, some discretion on that.
Does that help? Thank you. Next.
Hi, I was wondering if either of the panelists could talk about some of the equity issues around Prop 51 and where low-income urban school districts would get the revenue to improve schools and construct new schools when overcrowding is an issue.
That's Sherry brought up a point that whoever's first in line gets the best
Right.
shot at the money. And Jerry Brown has always been very concerned about poor and disadvantaged school districts. His first elected office was in the community college district here in Los Angeles on the board there. But the question that's been raised is whether sort of middle-class, middle-income schools get screwed in that process, because the upper-income schools can always vote themselves more money to pay for their schools. And so the question is almost equity between the have somethings but not too much and the have not very much at all. So what would each of you like to say about that?
Well, I think I did say what you said, and I will stick to it, and I think that is part of the governor's hesitation in all of this. He called it at one point something like a blunderbuss proposal, because, well, it also, although the schools get the lion's share of the $9 billion, it goes everywhere. It goes to healthcare, it goes to constructions, it goes to the schools, and it again defines what can be spent. It doesn't give the governor that opportunity to decide what priorities are, what is needed. It doesn't give the legislature the ability to decide. It locks into concrete what can and will be spent on each of these programs. And I don't think Governor Brown likes that at all. He has long looked at himself as the adult supervision in Sacramento, and I would have to agree with that. He's been around, he knows a lot, and I don't think he's happy about the way that this is constructed and how it locks in dynamics and procedures that he may not agree with.
Well, I disagree with that a little bit. This is a $9 billion school bond measure. It's going to go for construction of schools, K through 12 and community college, and it indicates where the money goes, just like the legislature when they put a bond measure on the ballot, the same thing. Now, I would hope that the less wealthy districts would have an opportunity to bid on these things and to get their fair share. My guess is they have a tough time now getting their voters to approve these bond measures by 55%. So my feeling is that probably they will be have a better opportunity to get better schools if this passes. But Jerry Brown has been against it, and that was a big surprise for a lot of people.
He's also a decent believer in local control, depending on whether or not he has a personal interest in it, I guess. But I think that may have sort of influenced his perception on this, too.
Okay, next question, please.
A couple questions about the two death penalty initiatives. The first is, you said that the one that gets the more votes wins. Is it the larger percentage or the larger actual number of votes?
It's the actual number of yes votes.
Because they could both pass.
But it's not a percentage,
yeah.
because not everybody's
That's
going
right.
to vote on, a lot of people will vote for president, by the way, and not get down this far. Although I think the death penalty will attract a lot of people, but it's the number of yes votes as opposed to the percentage of people voting on it.
However, it has to be 50% plus one in order to
yeah,
pass.
sure.
It's
Yeah,
not simply the number of votes.
Yeah.
So it's not like for president that if you vote for, the Democrat and the Republican that they cancel out. You could vote for both of these and your ballots would count. Your vote would count in each case. So, thank you.
And then on 66, the one that would speed up, how much of that is going to be affected by federal laws about the need for appeals? A lot of that cost is driven by the federal rules, isn't that correct?
Well, that's a very good point, and I think if there's a federal issue, you can go into federal court, but usually the federal courts defer in many cases to the state unless there is a federal constitutional issue. But your point is a good one. It probably will be more than the 5 years they're talking about, but now it's 20 and 30 years where prisoners, and we haven't had a execution since in 10 years, since 2006.
And it's now on hold because of the problems with
Right,
the
with
cocktail
the
that's
drug
being
cocktail.
used. So there cannot be a death penalty implemented at this point in California.
So there are regulations that the state has to observe to jump through the hurdles for the death penalty, and then each case may have issues of its own. If the jury was unconstitutionally impaneled because minorities were excluded, for example, or other evidentiary reasons that also raise constitutional questions, then that bumps it into the federal courts because it becomes constitutional. So there are almost two layers for some people who are sentenced to death row. You've got the required procedural things in California, and then you've got constitutional issues that may figure into the case, which would not be affected by this, as you say. Okay, next.
Hi, so Proposition 64, is there a tax rate established per sale, and is that tax money going to anything specific?
Which one is 54?
It's 15, it's
Marijuana.
15%.
The cigarette tax, are
No.
you talking
No, I'm
about?
sorry, the marijuana initiative? I
15
thought that was
oh.
64.
15% is the tax.
64.
15%.
1-5.
Oh,
And
God,
others
okay.
also.
And it's expected to raise $1 billion a year for state and local.
But it's to go to health issues, not the general
yes, that's
fund,
right, that's
correct?
right. It's designated how it goes, that's right.
Right. So it would
For
not
law
be part of the
enforcement,
general fund.
They're also supposed to spend money on developing DUI tests. It's usually the kiss of death when you say the money goes to the general fund, so that's why they specify where the money goes.
And that's in addition to the current sales tax.
Yes, in addition to the current, that's right, in addition to the current sales tax.
There is some sort of, there's a way to keep it out of the general fund?
It will be out of the
This
general.
will keep it out of the general fund.
And, Sherry's point is it should go to the general fund. She thinks the legislature should deal with it. The public disagrees with Sherry. I tend to agree with her, but you never will
grew up
get.
in the
You will,
legislature.
sorry, we both worked in the legislature, but if you put the money in the general fund, this would probably go down. The opponents would
Right.
argue against it. But good question. Thank you.
Thank you.
So also on Prop 64, are there thoughts about how to handle intoxicated driving since, with alcohol, it's relatively straightforward to measure blood alcohol content and intoxication, whereas with marijuana, THC can be in your system for a lot longer. So how have people thought about the safety aspect of that with driving?
Well, there are 2 points on that. One, it's driving while impaired, and so it's going to be give the officer a lot of discretion as to are you driving while impaired. Sort of like driving with prescription drugs. It's sort of the same, if you're driving erratically. But the proposition also spends a lot of money trying to develop tests so in the future that you're able to determine through blood tests or even tests administered right there at the scene whether the person is impaired or not. But at this point, as I understand it, there are no blood alcohol breathalyzer tests
Right.
like there are for drunk driving.
Right. And there's, short of the, I saw you roll down your window and throw out the doobie test.
Or there it
This
is on the
still-
sea.
Yeah. Those are still works in progress, because
have a
as you said,
broken-
there's no blood alcohol test that does the equivalent with marijuana.
So my guess is that if you're driving erratically, you're in trouble. If you're not driving erratically, probably you're okay.
Okay, everybody's taking notes now, I can tell. The question was raised, then, are there any issues on the ballot that will have to face constitutional hurdles? We
All
have
of them.
California Constitution or federal Constitution?
Well, okay, I'd be a little facetious, but almost all of these are challenged by the opponents. My guess is the death penalty 66 will be challenged. Marijuana could be challenged.
If anyone wants to
The one dealing 57, dealing with the felons, release of felons might be challenged by DAs. The one we know will not be challenged is 59, dealing with the Citizens United case,
Yeah.
because it's just advisory.
And what about the fear or the pleasure in knowing that as California goes, so goes the nation, that things that happen here spread? So would, for example, the ammunition regulation, would, for example, other of these measures start catching on elsewhere?
On the gun control issue,
It's not gun control, it's bullet control.
Sorry.
Okay.
The two issues that seem to have the best chance of being enacted, not only here but around the country, are the ammo initiative and more sophisticated background checks. Even the NRA, for all of its various reasons, having stepped back from the initiative process on this, believes that if anything is going to be established and is going to be established throughout, it will be those two provisions.
I-
They're
I
the
would-
least offensive to everybody.
I would add 56, dealing with tobacco taxes. If California
Oh,
increases the
absolutely.
tobacco taxes, you'll see it elsewhere. I would add the marijuana initiative, you'll see that in
Yep.
many other states. I think I would add by 59, the one that doesn't do anything, but if Californians say we don't like Citizens United, we will see that elsewhere.
Nah,
And the
nah.
death penalty, if California abolishes the death penalty, you'll see it in other states as well.
And there have only been a couple of states that have abolished the death penalty by voters' choices.
Well,
Most of them are
and some-
legislative or
yeah,
governors.
Governors, executive, legislative, yeah.
So any other points the two of you would like to make?
The initiative process is alive and well.
And that's either good news or bad news.
So you're going to be taking your bedroll when you go into the voting booth this time and wake yourself up. And want to let you know that you can always contact us at KPCC in person or hashtags props and pints, hashtag voter game plan. You two, how can they find you? What's your Twitter and?
I think my Twitter is
SBJ
hashtag SBJC,
And
No Twitter.
Facebook, damned if I know.
all right, so now on Wednesday, November 2nd, Larry Mantle and I are going to host a cram session about, again, your sample ballot, other voting experts. We've got the Senate race, a quick run through all these ballot initiatives. Again, you can RSVP at kpcc.org/in-person. So please thank Sherry Bebitch, Jeffe.
Thank you, guys, you were good.
Bob Stern, Angel City Brewery,
And Patt Morrison.
thank you. And please thank KPCC's in-person team, and thank yourselves for coming.